All right. We're switching to the podcast screen now. This is the first episode of the Let's Talk BnS podcast, hosted here on the Imperial channel. I'm joined with Dakaringer. How are you today?
Hello, good.
All right, and we're going to be talking about a lot of stuff regarding Blade and Soul today. Talking about the closed beta, talking about the release that's coming, early start in 2 days or so. That's pretty soon. And then PvP, PvE, all that good stuff. But first, let's have a little introduction. Why don't you go ahead and start us off, Daka? What have you done in the Blade and Soul community, and what brought you here today?
So once again, I am Daka, also known as RLRDL. I have lots of names. I need to focus on one, I guess. During launch, my main character will be R. As for what I've been doing, well, I've been playing BnS since open beta in Korea. So that's
a long time ago.
3.5 years ago. I've been on and off on BnS. But yeah, you can say I know a lot about the game.
You've accumulated the information over a long time.
Yes. Also, I am the creator of the BnS tree. If you don't know about skills or anything, you can check out there to read up on your class skills and all that good stuff.
The foreigner's dream, so to speak. I feel like you've saved many foreigners a lot of trouble by having that. And even in the chat, we see intros saying, God bless, hashtag BnS tree.
That's how it all started, yeah.
That is indeed how it all started. So I'm really glad to have Daka joining us, or joining me rather, on this podcast. I think he brings a lot of really good information, has a lot of knowledge and history with the game, and of course his work with the BnS tree is fantastic. So really glad to have him here. Now, as for me, I'm kind of, not quite as decorated as Daka. I did play back in 2013, a little bit on the Korean servers, and I still do play on the Korean servers, but mostly you guys may know me as a shoutcaster for the Imperial tournaments and getting into shoutcasting the tournaments and doing a lot of that stuff. So now I'm here doing a podcast for you guys, and hopefully you'll enjoy it just as much as Daka and I have as much fun doing it. So there's not much more to say about me. You'll be able to find me in game with the ID Rainy. I managed to reserve both of those, thankfully, with all the crazy things I went down with the name reservation. How did you feel about that, Daka? I know maybe you've been keeping up on the news with all these things with NC Soft and the name reservation, and people were all up in arms about it. Do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I've been lurking on the forums. Personally, I have no stance. I'm kind of neutral on that.
I'm a little bit neutral too, yeah.
I was able to get the name I was thinking of for a few days. So my in-game character name is R. It's a unique 2-letter name despite the 3-letter limitation.
Cool. You worked your magic to get that one?
I just put a space in between the letters.
Oh, okay. I was about to say, how much did you bribe NC to give you that name? Well, that's cool.
My other character name is Naru. So you may know that it's one of the old civilizations in BnS. You can see Naru ruins scattered all across the earthen realms.
Right.
So yeah, that's a pretty unique name as well.
Right. Well, that's good. I mean, I think I kind of agree with you regarding the whole thing with NC Soft and the mods and all the hubbub about the name reservation and stuff. I don't think I have that strong of a stance, and maybe that's bad, right? Maybe we should care more about what NC Soft does, but maybe I'm just too moderate of a person. But on the other hand, I feel like there's so much that we're assuming, there's so much information that we're missing, right? It's hard to really have a strong opinion one way or the other, because when I hear from one side, I really feel like, oh, that makes sense. When I hear from the other side, I'm like, oh, that makes sense too. I don't know. Maybe I'm just a follower, not really a leader. But hopefully, with that, hopefully all the viewers and all you out there got the names that you wanted and are happily living in your world where you can be whoever you want to be. I'm sure those people who wanted to get Naruto and all those are a little bit upset, but that's all in the past. So why don't we go ahead and start talking about the real nitty-gritty things. So North America and Europe Blade and Soul is finally coming. It's finally here. We've been waiting years and years and years for it. There's a lot of delays. The reasons which, yeah.
Oh, forever. Oh my god.
Forever. And it's finally here. And, you know, to be honest, Daka, I feel like the way I envisioned this playing out was a little different than how it actually has played out, you know? I feel like the community is a little chaotic because of the division between, you know, how long it took this game to reach the West.
Yes.
I feel like now the community is very divided between those who have played the other regions, those who are very familiar with the game, and those who are very new to the game, right? And we see that a lot on, like, the subreddit, on Blade and Soul Dojo. You know, you see that all the time where new players will come and is like, oh, I have no idea what this game is about. This is so fantastic, you know. The graphics in this game are awesome. I love the classes. And then you get like the old veterans that are like, oh, North America, you know, needs to come out with content faster. You know, there's this dichotomy. So in general, how did you feel the closed betas went? Because I feel like that's a little bit telling of the game, right? The closed beta.
I would say the veterans are like the extreme minority compared to like all the rest of the people.
I would say that would be very likely, yes.
Yes, so I guess CBT is a very for a good experience for those new players. Get to try all the new classes, get a feel for what the mechanics are like, and I'm sure we'll get a lot more of those people at launch.
Yeah.
Veterans, they'll just like speed through leveling and
just speed through it and just be sitting there at the end.
Like a couple of hours. I did too.
Yeah, that's what I did. I'm not even that veteran of a player. So in general, I think the closed beta was pretty. I mean, it went pretty much as I expected it to, right? I wouldn't say, I don't know if you agree with this thought, but I think Blade and Soul as a game, like, there are a lot of little things about the UI and like bugs in the game and just like little hassles that you have to get through, and for the most part I didn't really see the closed beta like make any of that better. You know, in fact there's a whole thing, like one of the big ones is playing the game on full screen, right? That really like screws up the game. I don't know if you experienced that.
Other than the little translation stuff, like some skills were really hard to understand.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I nearly took that for granted
because
because we know what they do.
Since the game was out for several years, developers had all the time to fix all the little stuff.
Yeah.
So it came out a lot more polished than, say, 3 years ago.
Yeah, that's
oh
certainly
my
true.
god. Brings back memories.
The game is very different too. We have the different skill patch, and I guess how do you feel about that? Because I remember when I was playing back in 2013, and this was still at the level 45 cap. I mean, they had the Hongwon levels, and they had Mushin release, but the skills were very, very different. The game felt very different, and they didn't have the weapon upgrade system, right? That came with the first expansion at 50, I believe.
Yes.
So the game was incredibly different, and how do you feel about now in this scenario? We're kind of like playing half the game almost, right? Because in Korea, we're taking the Korean skill patches, right? It's not exactly up to date, but it's pretty close. It's pretty close up to date, but we're also only limited to level 45. This could change a lot of dynamics, kind of like, you know, how many points you need to make a class feel complete. You know, being limited at 45, but having this skill tree that maybe was made with considerations to how many points you would have at level 50, perhaps. What do you feel about that?
I would say some classes have a bit more advantage over the others. Some classes require less skill points. I'm sure they actually quite fixed some of that for the KFM and with the launch build.
Yeah, I think so. I think so too. They made it a little bit better. I think that it's interesting because that seems to be a lot of the confusion that the foreigner, or rather the players who've played on the other regions have, is that they're so used to playing the game at level 50 that now, within the context of the level 45 game, it just feels weird. Like some of the things you would expect the class to be able to do, they can't really do. You have to make choices between two different skills that maybe you would
make trade-offs.
Yeah, you have to make trade-offs. So, well, Overall, I felt like the closed beta was very fun. It was definitely a nice experience to be able to play at low ping, for one. I
Oh
mean,
yes, it
lower
was
ping,
a
I
eye
suppose.
opener.
Yeah, I was like, oh my god, this game feels so smooth. It's so fast. Um, how did you feel about that? I mean, obviously, I think this would be the most impactful in PvP. In PvP.
Well, I did play for a few days in Korea when I like visit there, but um, I didn't really play PvP to 100%, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. There were a lot of
Uh,
players who just went ham on it. That was all they did, really.
yeah. I would say I was able to pull off combos that I know in theory, but I could have never dreamed of doing it myself.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It was a pretty. It was also a learning experience for me because I would have to try out new combos,
Right.
react to new stuff.
Right.
Like after playing NA, I couldn't go back to Korea.
It
I
feels
was,
weird. It feels
I
really
know.
weird.
Like how did I was wondering how did I ever get to gold plat in Korea with this ping? Oh my
Yeah.
god.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I can relate to that. Whenever I go back, I mean, I'm playing on Korean servers right now. When I go back and try the PvP, it's almost like it feels so slow. It feels like you're walking through tar, and then on top of that, you just like play in a different way because you become less confident about certain things, right? I think one of the big ones is, for example, the C shoulder days on Blade Masters. That thing already has a long animation to begin with. And if you're trying to use that to chase down like F rolls, for example, it gets really difficult. You almost have to guess when they're gonna do their F roll, I feel. It's like it's little things like that. Then you start becoming not confident, like, oh, I probably shouldn't use a C because it's gonna miss, or like you use it when they didn't roll yet, or you use it at a bad time and they get invul on it. It's really weird. It's really strange to play in that scenario.
Oh, yeah. Switching topics, we should talk more about what's for the new players, right? 'Cause
Yes.
as I
Yes.
said, the veterans are like the small minority. So, what should we expect from the launch?
Okay. Yeah, I think that, well, obviously announced, NCSoft has announced that Pohorang will be the big end game to shoot for, right? But there's a long way kind of to get there for I think new players. First, they have to figure out the classes, which playstyle suits them. I mean, one of the most popular questions is like, oh, which class is the most overpowered? Which is the best class in the game? So maybe it might be nice to maybe summarize each of the classes just a little bit. Do you have any
Sure.
thoughts about those?
Well, first off, every I would argue every class is balanced. Like NC brings out new patches every few months, so it's really um, no point
Hmm.
saying this class is the best.
It
Go for
changes.
this.
It changes
Yeah,
a
it
lot.
changes all the time. Like each class had its golden days.
They had their moment to
Um,
shine.
okay, so first off, Blade Masters. Um, well, yeah, Blade Masters, I would say they are the tanks of the game.
Uh-huh.
NC also thinks so too with their aggro generating skills, which, by the way, isn't really generating aggro. Um, so the way how aggro works in this game is based on damage dealt to the mob. But you have this stat in your character screen called threat, I believe, and it's like a
Hmm.
percentage. What that
Right.
percentage does is makes the uh, boss or mob think you're doing that many more damage than you're actually doing.
So everything is based with respect to the numbers that you're putting out. So you can't just
Yes.
sit there and just like block and use your like whirling slash and then block and whirling slash. You actually have to still do damage, put out DPS.
Yeah. So what Whirling Slash, or I believe it's called Cyclone.
Yeah.
I need to get used to the
Yeah, it
names.
gets me very confused too. I have no idea what anything's called.
What that does is like increase your threat by 150%, I believe. Not sure.
A big
Yeah,
modifier,
100.
yeah, I'd have to double check.
And yeah, so for 5 or so seconds, or was it 15? I don't remember the exact specifics, but for a set amount of duration, all your attacks um, deal, well, they don't actually deal 150% damage. The mob thinks you're doing 150% more damage, and therefore giving the aggro to you.
Right. Which also means that there's a problem when you're playing with extremely overgeared people. Like, if your Blade Master is undergeared compared to maybe like somebody else in your party, then it can cause a problem if the other guy is doing way too much DPS. You know, the aggro still won't. There's no necessarily like a taunt function. Like, there are a few taunt skills, but there's no way to hard control the aggro in that sense.
That being said, it's not like BMs have to be the tank. Other classes can do it okay, but not as efficiently. It really impedes their DPS cycles and their efficiency drops. That's why Blade Masters and KFMs are considered tanks, because they can attack, move fluidly between offense and defense.
And they don't often mess things up. Like, I guess the biggest thing you would think of is like if an assassin has aggro and it goes into stealth, that can often make things very confusing for a while. So to summarize, I would say, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but if you were to summarize Blade Masters, would you say flexible? They're quite flexible. They deal a good amount of damage.
Very versatile.
Yeah, they deal a good amount of damage. They have good party utility, right? So if you want to be a very good boon to your party, it's almost never wrong to have a Blade Master in the group. And then they have the aggro generation. They have a little help on that. So then if you do want to have a more controlled situation, you can take a Blade Master and he can kind of guide the enemy's attacks towards himself and utilize his consistent block and his multiple dodges to handle those situations. I think that's a pretty good summary.
Yeah. So what tanks usually do is stay on one side while the other guys stay on the other side of the boss and do DPS.
So why don't then we talk about, I guess in some ways, a counterpart to Blade Masters, and in some ways I would say that would be the Kung Fu Master, right?
Right.
Because in some senses they fill out a similar-ish role. I mean, you can't really say that too completely. Kung Fu Master is maybe a slightly more aggressive tank in the game.
So what sets Kung Fu Masters and Blade Masters apart is how they DPS. So with Blade Masters, you have their Blade stance and their draw stance. Draw stance is more their offensive, while Blade stance, well, you need to use block, which actually forces you to Blade stance, and your cheat. Most of your cheat generation also comes from Blade stance as well. So you have Blade dancers would have to constantly shift between those two stances,
right,
to block and to tank and DPS. KFM, on the other hand, doesn't have a stance.
Right, they can just do everything how they are.
And their counters are have very short animations. So you attack, counter, attack, and you can just keep doing that over and over and over.
Very quick.
Yeah.
And what about the party utility that Kung Fu Masters bring? Maybe, I don't think it's available at 45. Is that true?
Actually, it is available at 45.
Okay.
So this is new to NA. It wasn't in CBT. So what Kung Fu Masters get with the new skill patch is, I don't know what they're calling it in NA, but I call it Spirit Burst in BnS tree. So what this does is for like 10 seconds, it boosts the party's critical hit chance, critical hit damage, as well as lifesteal. On top of that, KFM gets like 6-second CD reduction on 4 each time everybody else hits.
Which is a lot.
Yeah, so the KFM can just spam 4 while everybody's attacking. So this skill is under the grapple tree.
Right, it's the grapple hotkey, basically. Yeah. So that's kind of, I mean, to summarize Kung Fu Masters, they have slightly more aggressive party utility, whereas Blade Masters have a lot of like You know, they have the projectile block and they have like the 3-hit invul barrier eventually. The Kung Fu
Yeah.
Masters have this aggressive buff that they can put on. Also, their animation canceling is a lot quicker. Their defense and offense is weaved into one, so you don't have to segment the two as the Blade Master does, meaning that they can keep up with the aggression a lot easier. Is there anything else to mention about Kung Fu Masters?
Not really.
Well, I suppose we should talk about CC also, right? Blade Master is a big go-to on his days. They do have the option for knockdown, and stuns get a little difficult for them.
Yeah, for a stun, they would have to switch to draw stance, and then
In
draw
LB,
flicker.
Yeah, they use a flicker. But for Kung Fu Masters, they have the Rising Dragon and Tremor.
Yes.
And then, I don't know if they typically take any others. I'm not sure.
They sometimes take C Groggy, but not really anymore.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And then they do have the grapple, which I don't think is used that often in PvE. Sometimes they
almost
use.
never. They would almost always take. Actually, sometimes they'll use the healing grapple, but
The only
most of the time-
situation recently that I've come across where they use grapple is in Tomb, but that's
most of the time you'll want to take Spirit Burst.
right. So that's for CC for KFMs, and I think that rounds out KFMs.
Oh,
quite well.
KFMs also have knockdown. They're
Oh,
leg
right,
sweep and then
the backdash.
SS to left click.
Right, so knockdown, and they have stun. And the reason why this is important is because CC becomes an increasingly important part of the game as you go into the end game, for sure. In coordinating the CC and knowing which class can do which comfortably becomes very important. So that's KFMs. KFMs in a nutshell. Why don't we talk about a class that is very different? Maybe let's go to like the Forcemasters, for example.
Forcemasters. Okay, so they're more primarily a DPS class, a ranged DPS class. In terms of utility, they have their Ice Flower, which
Right.
protects their party members in ice, but generally, people would prefer Dandelion
Which is a summoner
Or,
ability.
or Assassin Dandelion,
Right, the assassin counter.
or the Blade Master Bubble. The reason being is because once you're locked in ice, you can't really do anything. So people would rather keep DPSing while they're being protected. Of course, you can just cancel your ice with your F, but then
On
you lose
sustained
it.
attacks, it doesn't work quite as well because you need to sustain the block.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what about the damage? I mean, Force Masters don't have any aggro modifiers, not that I can think of. Not that they would
No.
really want that, would they? Do they?
Yeah, they actually have like some skills does not generate threat at all.
Oh, well, there you go.
Yeah.
And they can do a lot of damage. I'm sure if you've seen some videos and some streams of Force Masters, they they hit for very big numbers. If that's your thing, I think Force Masters are a good one to choose.
There are two ways to build Forcemaster. Actually, almost every class have two ways to build. Since like each class has two primary elements, this doesn't really matter in any launch since there are no.
Elemental accessories or
Yes,
yeah.
but later you would have to go down one path. So Force Masters have ice or fire. Kung Fu Masters have earth or wind, I believe. No, fire or wind. And then
Yeah, I
Blade
think the
Master-
only Earth is actually Soul Fighter. Right?
No, Destroyer is also is
Oh,
earth.
Destroyer is, yeah, that's right.
And Summoner is also earth.
Okay, yeah.
And Blade Masters have lightning and fire.
Lightning Fire.
Well, yeah, you would have to research into that. I can tell you, but that would take a lot more.
I mean, I think your BnS tree does have the elements listed, right? And typically
Yes.
classes won't have like more than two. So if you see like two different elements, you can probably safely assume that those are the main elements that the class would utilize.
I generally dislike the elements because it locks you into one build if you
Yeah.
have element accessories.
Yeah, it kind of guides which trees you'll take for certain skills too. And you can't really swap the accessories out in the middle of a fight either.
Yeah.
So, and as far as I know, they only come from like the earring, I believe.
In Korea, actually, earring, necklace, and um, ring.
Ah,
Yeah.
okay, so multiple accessories, but good to know. Alright, so Forcemaster is mainly range, damage dealing, has party utility in terms of the Ice Flower, which is the Ice Block Protect for your party. Also has a projectile block. They can utilize
Yes.
that. And they're kind of unique because their dashes don't have a range requirement. They can actually use it at any time.
Yeah.
So
Which is
defensively, sorry,
which
go ahead.
is their one of their few iframe skills.
Yes,
Oh yeah, we forgot to talk about iframes.
that's true. Yeah. Well, I suppose the big thing to know is that all classes have different amounts of iframes. If I were to quickly summarize, Blade Masters have short but frequent iframes. A lot of their iframes are less than you would expect, but they have very fast, zippy dodges. Kung Fu Masters have long durations of iframes, but the cooldowns on their dodges are a little bit longer, I believe. And then Force Masters don't have that many, but they can be very precise with them because they don't have as many requirements to utilize, especially the range.
So, next class?
Why don't we go ahead and talk about the, I guess what maybe certain people would think is a counter. I don't think it's very true, but I guess the Summoner
The
compared to the
summoner.
Force Master.
Okay, the summoner. These days in Korea, they're like, um, it's the golden age for them. With the strong DPS, they're like wanted in all parties, but this is due to change. They actually got some buffs in PvP.
Uh huh. I heard a lot of
Uh,
summoners talking about their changes, namely Panda Stick. I think he was he was going crazy about the changes, trying to figure things out. But
okay, what makes summoner unique? They have their pet, that's one thing.
yes, their pet, and they have controls for their pet, so that actually changes the dynamic of how the character plays out with respect to the other classes in the game.
I would say the pet is like a double-edged sword. Once, like, the pet has your most of your CCs,
Hmm.
but like if the pet dies, then you can't really do anything. Uh,
But
and
one nice thing is if you die, your pet can save you.
that's true. And there's also the thing that where the cat just runs off and pulls out aggros.
I mean, it's a cat. What can you do?
People have been asking for the de-summoning
Ah, right. Uh huh.
function.
Uh huh.
I think they also needed to, yeah.
Mm, mm. I think it would help the control a lot.
Yeah.
It would be very useful. They should probably think about adding it in. So what about in terms of, okay, I guess we'll go down a list. Party utility, iframes, and damage output.
Party utility, well, they're pretty much almost identical to Forcemaster, other than Ice Ice Flower,
Ice
they
flower.
have Dandelion,
Mm-hmm.
which is better in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. The dandelion, and then they also have their smoke screen, similar to Assassin's, kind of the projectile block.
Yeah.
And then,
Their DPS comes mostly from their right click, either Rumblebees or Sunflower,
mhm.
and their other source of damage. Most don't realize this, but it's also from their I don't know what they call it in NA. You know those little grassy things that
Yeah,
pop up?
the stupid little chestnut fired stupid things.
Yeah.
You stand in them and you just start dying mysteriously. Those things.
Yeah. That does a lot of damage as
Yeah,
well.
big, big damage. So I guess they're a little bit more of like a, you could say more micromanaging, less, I think less so about timing certain things and more so with keeping up with where your pet is, what you're doing, and
Yeah.
focusing on putting your debuffs down, like your ground AoEs and stuff.
So what you can do lots of cool stuff with your cat. You can like when your party member is dead, you can just bring the cat up to them and do CPR.
Yeah.
That's pretty cute.
Yes.
And
The
then rest
animation
them
is always fun to watch.
yeah, while the summoner is off doing other stuff. And if the whole party is, well, if the summoner is dead, you can use the cat to sacrifice itself and then like res everybody else in the vicinity.
Right. Uh,
Uh,
what about their iframes? What kind of
I
defensive abilities do summoners have?
Summoners don't really have that many iframes other than the usual SS, which every class has. They
Mm-hmm.
have their Dandelion, that's an iframe. Well, the
Mm-hmm.
Dandelion, and then they press F, that's an iframe.
Mm-hmm.
The normal Dandelion is a normal counter. And they have Friendship, which is putting a bubble around their cat and themselves.
They gain a barrier that blocks attacks.
Yeah.
So that's summoners in a nutshell. So I would say, in general, not necessarily too complicated on the defensive front in the sense that they don't have a lot of skills, but maybe complicated because you need to know how to arrange those skills in a certain way to get maximum effectiveness.
It is very ping friendly and I would say beginner friendly. It is, I believe, 2 stars in characters
Hmm.
creation
Hmm.
in terms of difficulty.
Would you agree with
Well,
that rating?
uh, yeah, I would actually agree.
Hmm. So that's summoners in a nutshell. I think that covered them pretty well. Cat.
Mm.
The cat does cute stuff. Sometimes it runs off and gets bugged. Lasers for days.
Pull all the aggro.
Oh god, cat, please. Oh yeah, that's also the other thing. The cat can tank occasionally.
Oh yes. Cats, summoners are also very solo friendly. The cat can act as the tank while the summoner DPS
Hmm.
slash healer.
Hmm.
The way healing works with the summoner is like they actually transfer health from themselves to the cat or vice versa.
Hmm. So it's like a life siphon kind of thing between
Yeah.
your pet. True friend. Only a true friend will give you their own life.
Speaking of healing, shall we talk about how healing works?
Oh yeah. So
I believe
that's
some
it's
people
different.
like wanted to play healer.
Right. And we did talk about like kind of tanks and DPS too, and we kind of tied into the idea of like doing DPS to keep aggro as opposed to having skills that are innately higher threat. So I think in term a lot of people have a difficulty grasping the concept of like a very loose definition of roles in Blade and Soul, right? I think like you said, a Blade Master can tank, but it's not necessarily the tank. Same for Kung Fu Masters. They could tank, and it's a good idea to have them tank sometimes, but they don't need to be, right?
Right.
And then everybody kind of is responsible for doing damage. And then for the healing, what about the healing, Daka?
There is no healer.
There is no healer. You heard it here first. Oh my god, I can feel the tears of healers with past MMOs just streaking down their face. What do you mean there's no healers, Daka? What do you do? How do you come back if you get hit low in health in this game?
So the way you heal is mostly off life steal gems.
Mm-hmm.
Those are like a must-have item for everybody.
Yes.
Those purple gems you occasionally get. The other way is through your skills. Some skills have some skills that like straight out heals you. Other skills actually heals you based on the damage dealt.
Mm-hmm.
So you gotta use that. But the most important thing is don't get hit.
A concept that people will become very familiar with immediately when they play the game, I think. At least
Yes.
the end game. So, don't get hit, which means that everybody is responsible in a sense of their own defense, right?
Right. If you die, it's your own fault. Well, actually,
Many times it is your own fault, but sometimes,
yeah.
mechanics can get in the way. But it's definitely true. I think one of the things that's very noticeable about this game is like a lot of the fights can kind of be carried in a sense. I don't know if you necessarily agree with this statement, but I think like if there's like a few good players in your party that can consistently avoid attacks and execute the boss fight mechanics, a lot of the times they could end up just beating the whole fight. But on the flip side, I think it becomes very obvious when there's somebody who doesn't know the fight, right? Because they can often die within the first like 3 attacks of the fight if they don't
I
know how to avoid
guess
it.
it really comes down to the enrage timers.
Yes, if you can beat the enrage timer, then you can continue on the fight.
Um, in this game, I would say there are only two roles. You're either the tank or you're the DPS.
You're
And
either the tank or everybody else.
yeah, and actually, that's not 100% true.
Mm,
I guess it depends on the boss as well. Instead of like classic healer DPS tank roles, what BnS has is quite unique. It actually depends on the boss you're fighting.
hmm.
Many boss have different roles depending on the mechanics. I guess it's true for other MMOs, but um, if you fail, you everybody wipes with that
Yes.
kind of mechanic.
Yes. There are punishing
Uh,
mechanics like that.
but at launch, don't expect those kind of mechanics just yet.
Hmm. It'll be a
Or
little easier for
yeah.
sure, but that doesn't mean you can slack on Poharang.
Hmm.
And we'll talk about that a little more. So, in interest of I suppose speeding this up a little bit, why don't we go ahead and round out the assassin single target DPS is through the roof. They go crazy on DPS, fast animation canceling.
They're
Um,
actually quite similar to summoners in that regard.
yes, yes. Their defensive skills are the party-wide stealth, which is like the dandelion. They have that to offer. They also have the projectile block to offer with their smoke bomb. You have to control stacks of poison to do the DPS. So I would say, with respect to the other classes, maybe the assassin DPS game is a slightly more complicated game because managing your poison stacks is can be a chore sometimes.
Yeah, some skills have set requirements, like Heart Stab.
Hmm.
Heart Stab has almost no cast time when the target's poisoned, like
Hmm.
have 5 stacks of poison. So
Right.
when you're out of stealth,
When you're in
uh,
stealth, it has a sped up
yeah,
animation.
I guess we should talk about the stealth mechanic too.
Yeah. Okay. So in general, in Blade and Soul, stealth is relatively short duration, like 6 seconds. There are different ways to refresh it, but as a general rule of thumb, when you're in stealth, you move faster. You
Increased
also,
movement speed, increased critical hit chance, and I believe critical hit damage as well. And not to forget the evade chance. They get 50% evade chance.
I can almost hear the tables flipping, Daka. Can you hear the rage? Can you hear the anger? So increase evasion, increase move speed, increase crit, and crit damage. All very good, all very useful. How do they break out of stealth? What things break you out of stealth?
So some skills like breaks you out of stealth. Other times you just wait it out.
Yeah, some skills will break you out. Some skills actually maintain your stealth. So within the realm of assassins, actually a lot of skills maintain their stealth. So a lot of their rotations do include like staying in stealth for a certain way. And if you go for like the lightning damage build, a lot of your DPS is requires you to be in stealth to do that.
Yeah.
Um, so
So assassins in general, if you're not in stealth, you do dark damage. If you're in stealth, you do lightning damage.
mhm. And those two builds kind of separate themselves in that fashion. So I think PvE in assassins in general is a little different. I think a lot of people choose assassins because they like rogue-like characters. You know, they like double daggers, moving fast, dealing a lot of damage, and that's all true for assassins. But I think they're very different from other games in the sense that like you do play very gimmicky in some ways. I think you know
I
you have
find assassins like really cool. They move like a real assassin.
yeah.
Like you have their jump, flash, and
Hmm.
like they appear out of nowhere and then they go back into stealth.
A lot of teleportation,
Yeah.
movement abilities. But I think the biggest difference, like if you were to compare it with like a rogue in World of Warcraft, I think they're actually quite different in the sense that like you really, I mean, you have the few abilities, your left button, right button, F to deal damage, but you really have to make use of a lot of your other tools to set yourself up to do that, especially in the solo environment, right?
Right.
As an assassin, you have to be very comfortable with being like, okay, well, I'm just gonna deal with it and sit in stealth and kill everything in stealth if I can, you know, and you're just gonna have to be okay with that. I think a lot of people are surprised by how cowardly maybe you have to play to be an assassin in some senses.
Well, maybe.
Maybe.
But
Certainly,
some mobs can see through stealth, especially the
yes,
bosses later on.
like in the Mushin Tower, for example.
Right.
So I think it just adds this different complexity to the class. It isn't just a face roll class, that's for sure. I think a lot of people can get that impression. You don't get your damage for free. You need to work for it, for sure. I feel.
Okay, next class, destroyers,
Yeah, sure. Let's go for the destroyers. The big axe wielding class known
berserker
for.
type class.
Yes,
People think they are the tank. They're actually not really.
they're not.
They are beefy, I can give you that, but
I think they have more mitigation skills than most would realize.
yeah,
They can take things to the face quite a bit better than
I
the other
guess they're
classes.
more the traditional tanks, but if you do that, your DPS isn't really going to be great.
Hmm. They have the option to do it.
Yeah, they can just spin around,
Yeah.
spin to win.
And I think sometimes like in the end game a mark of a good destroyer is making those decisions, right? It's like, oh, when do I need to bunker down and avoid attacks of this set? And when is it very scary for me? And when can I, kind of swapping up your playstyles a little bit.
So destroyers have like two types of spins. Other one is the deflect spins that all the PvPers know.
Oh
The
god.
other is the damage mitigation skill I spin, which increases your defense by like 400%, uh, decreases damage taken by like 25%, and all that.
Hmm.
In PvE, you would use that a bit more. So you can even the unblockable skills, uh, you can just spin to dodge. You don't really have to iframe.
Hmm. Hmm. So what about the damage potential that destroyers can put out?
Oh, it's pretty great. They have great sustained damage, mainly due to their RBLB animation canceling.
Hmm.
Their um, so you use RB to damage, left click to regain the lost chi. So you can do that almost indefinitely.
It sustains itself in many ways.
Yes, and then you have those the Fury swipes.
Hmm.
Those like diagonal cleave style.
Very
The
quick.
rapid cleaving, yeah, they do
Yes.
burst extremely high burst damage.
Hmm.
And then there's also the enrage.
Hmm. And destroyers in the PvE sense are also very good at CC, right? They have a lot of CC that they can initiate on their own.
All right, so in PvE, destroyers are mostly supporting type. They have lots of CCs. They have like 3 stuns, 2 knockdowns. Actually, not that great in Groggy, but
Mm.
those 2 sets of CCs are enough.
And they come back up pretty quick, relatively
Yeah,
quick.
and after CCing, they would hold it up for everybody else to
Beat
deal
on.
free
Piñata mode.
DPS. So that is what Destroyer main should really look out for, looking opportunity to CC and then grabbing the guy, hold him up, and give everybody free DPS.
Hmm.
Reason is everybody else attacking, actually the Destroyer too, anybody who is attacking the grabbed guy gets 20% of their chi back per attack, so you can just indefinitely spam your main DPS moves and
Right. The big
yeah.
cheese spenders, the big damage. You can do that over and over and over again. It's very satisfying to do, that's for sure. I think so. Anything else about destroyers?
They're generally easy to play, I guess, in
Hmm.
PvE at least.
Relatively easy, and of course, like whenever we say easy to play, most of that is
Yeah,
easy to pick up, right?
right.
In the end, you're all no matter what class you pick at the high end of the game, you're gonna meet difficulties. You do need to get good at the game and learn the class through and through to make full use of the class. But destroyers, they are a little bit easier to pick up, I think.
They are a bit weak in terms of iframes, though.
Hmm.
Their SS, they only have like SS and their C,
Right.
flame wheel,
Your flame wheel.
and their fire wheel. The first few seconds,
Ah,
and the
yes.
first few second of enrage.
They
Yeah.
get some invul frames on that. So you're going to need to mix well your mitigation, trying to mitigate for big hits, and then also utilize your the few iframes you have at perfect moments to avoid big damage in PvE situations. So that's Destroyer for you. What other classes do we have left? I think
I
that's
believe we have Blade Dancer is the only one left, other than the other two.
the other two that's not going to come to NA. I guess if we
Yeah.
have time later at the end, maybe we can talk about them a little bit. But let's go ahead and talk about the Blade Dancer, which I think gave a lot of people nightmares in the closed beta, I feel.